Well, I'm very glad to be joined in this Chewing the Fat by Toby Hoare, a consummate ad man and an absolutely marvellous person, and somebody who I've had the privilege of knowing for a number of years. Toby, very warm welcome.
Well, thank you, David, for those very generous words.
Well, we sort of go back more years than I care to remember. I certainly had hair during those heady days in the advertising industry. Um, Toby, one of the things that'd be really interesting to get your perspective on, and I think it's interesting because you've done an amazing amount of things over the last few years. You've run HSBC on a global basis, which is one of the biggest advertising accounts in history.
Yeah.
Um, Large advertising agencies, and now you're the global client lead of one of WPP's biggest accounts, Unilever. Um, we're in a very strange time. Some would say a period where um, things are never ever going to return sort of back to where they were. And I think one of the really interesting things about your perspective is that you're working with a company, with Unilever, who has for a number of years now been talking about purpose more than anybody. Many people say that a purpose is not a purpose until it starts to cost you significant amounts of money. Otherwise, it's just a few words on a PowerPoint chart. Do you think the COVID time that we're in at the moment, do you really see this is a period where being a purpose-led business is unbelievably important?
Well, thanks, David. I mean, I've been involved with Unilever, as you know, for only a few months. So it's really an extraordinary sort of baptism of fire, really, to be involved with them during this COVID crisis. And obviously, I was aware, as everybody is, that Unilever and the current CEO Alan Jobe, and indeed some of his predecessors, have not only talked about the importance of purpose, but have sort of lived and breathed the whole purpose thing. I mean, Unilever are very passionate companies that have purpose, they believe, last. Brands that have purpose, they believe, grow, and people that have purpose thrive. And I was very taken by that right from the beginning. I'm even more taken by it now because I've seen that, in fact, it's true. And I think that when we look at what's happening in COVID, whilst Unilever have many brands and businesses that are, like every other company, really facing some very, very serious difficulties, they also have some brands and some businesses that are thriving and doing unbelievably well for obvious reasons because they make soaps and detergents and other household goods. But
Sure.
um, the thing that I guess has impressed me most about the way Unilever have responded to the COVID thing is that they've been very clear about not just saying they have purpose, but about what that purpose is. And again, Alan Jobe, their CEO, was very clear in his when he first talked about their four priorities. The first one he talked about was people, and he made a commitment that everybody who works for Unilever, whether an office manager, a cleaner, or a whatever they may be, anywhere around the world, that their roles would be secure. Unilever's taken no government money. It's standing on its own 2 feet, but its first priority was and is its people. The second priority was to make sure that the cash balance and that its balance sheet was where it needed to be. And then obviously they've talked about supply chain and the importance of that at times when factories aren't necessarily functioning and there are problems around the world. And then finally, community. And again, I think Unilever don't just talk about community, but they actually do an awful lot to support the words that they use around the importance of community. And they've now added a fifth purpose, which again I think is very wise. They've split their executive group, as I understand it, into two halves. One half to focus on the things I've just mentioned, and the other half to focus on life beyond COVID. So what needs to change, what needs to remain the same, and how can Unilever become even more purposeful, if you like, and benefit from that in the post-COVID world, which is what we're now beginning to spend most of our time on.
Do you also think that, this is a time where consumers are able quite clearly to be able to see for themselves whether there's substance behind purpose claims by all sorts of companies?
Yeah. Well, again, I go back to one of the first the first major meeting that I had when I took over this role with the senior management at Unilever. At the end of the meeting, Alan Jope basically said to us that the priorities were very clear. It was about creativity and agility. This is before we knew what was about coming down the tunnel. He wants us to strive and keep pushing harder and harder for greater levels of creativity around everything that we do, and also to do that more quickly and with more agility. Then, of course, what happened with COVID, and he said again that the reason this agility and creativity points were so important was because, in his view, it was highly likely that the tone of voice we were using to talk to consumers for all of their brands a month ago was probably not the right tone for that day. So the pre-COVID and the COVID, and so of course he was 100% right. So we spent a huge amount of time not so much revisiting the messaging, the reason why, but more thinking about the tone, the way that consumers wanted and expected brands to talk. And we talked about empathy, we talked about the need to display kindness and to understand at a time when there's huge amounts of uncertainty and frankly a lot of scared people in the world. So what we're trying to do now with Unilever is to make sure that every single brand, in every single thing that we do for them, whether it's an advertisement, a piece of content, social media, whatever it might be, is tonally correct, both for that brand and also for the audience that we're talking to. So, again, I think Alan used a phrase the other day: authenticity is the new currency of the day, and I
Yeah,
couldn't agree more with him, quite frankly. I think so. What we are increasingly doing, I don't think we've seen any of the work we've recently done on Dove or on Lux, some of the
indeed,
other
yes.
brands around the world. But authenticity is very much, I think, at the centre of where we're at the moment.
I mean, that you raised actually quite an interesting point, and maybe it's something that we've sort of forgotten about, really, which is the difference between sort of a proposition and a tone of voice, and
Mm.
actually how important tone of voice is.
Yeah,
Both on the creative brief and the work that we
yeah.
look at.
Well,
Propositions
I
can
think
remain the
I
same,
think
but
it's
tone
never
of voice
been.
can
Sorry.
have a propositions can remain the same. Indeed, one could argue should always remain the same to an extent in terms of what the product benefits of a product are. But the tone of voice can adapt and have massive changes in the way in which the creative work looks and feels.
100%. Sorry to interrupt you, but I think long gone are the days when a good product that meets a consumer need at a price they can afford is enough. I think that consumers expect more than that now, and part of that comes back to the purpose point, which we've already discussed. But the other part is around the tone of voice that we use to talk, to talk and listen to what our consumers are saying. So, we're spending more and more time trying to understand experience as well as the actual, the consumer, him or herself. So, absolutely, and I think if you look at, well, certainly look at ads or social media generally. I mean, I think the tone of voice has changed generally. I think it has changed, and does generally brands increasingly recognize the needs that people have going forward. I mean, we think from the research that our team have done and everything I've seen that a growing number of people in the world are looking to trust looking for trust in different quarters, if you like. Perhaps in the old days, one would expect to trust more than anything the government and the prime minister or the president, or whatever it might be. We live in a world now where that certainly doesn't seem to be the case in North America or in some other countries. And I think that the effect of that is that people perhaps then look to their employer as more of a sort of guiding light as to what is going to happen and what the future holds. And then I think further down the line, of course, is the role that brands play in that, and which is why I think that the tone of voice is so important. We'll see. I think over time, it seems to me people will now they will revert to brands they trust, but they may also revert to brands they can afford. So it may not be the swanky, showy prestige brands that thrive, but I think the very hardworking, we do what it says on the tin brands that I've known and trusted for so long and I can afford. I think those are the brands that we could see do really, really well in the near future.
I mean, Unilever pretty much invented the concept of brands, and certainly the concept of nurturing brands and brand management. The investment that Unilever over the years have made in their brands is massive. Do you think
Yeah.
this is also one of the time periods where we'll look back and we'll also say, actually, the historic investments that companies like Unilever made in brands, creating strong consumer bonds, great sort of product propositions, in this period really started to also pay back dividends to them as well.
Well, I do, but I mean, I would say that, wouldn't I? But I think if you look at the stats, which I haven't got in front of me, but I think the stats would support the argument that says that companies that support their brands in times of difficulty, like we are in now, brands that continue to believe in communication and talking to their audiences, when we come out of this, will be in a stronger position and will perform better than brands that don't. And I think there's lots of data to support that. And certainly, Unilever are very much clearly they have to prioritize because they have hundreds of brands, and some of them are brands that are going to be finding life very difficult at the moment, and others are going to be finding life less difficult. So obviously they have to reprioritize, but Unilever are still, very, very committed to building and developing their brands, and also to innovations. I think the other thing is that this is a fantastic time to be innovating and to be thinking about, what's next in this world that seems to be changing so rapidly.
I mean, in that context, I suppose you look at sort of innovation, trust in brand. I mean, you make the good point that more and more people are trusting, the establishment, however you want to define that, less and less, and therefore the opportunity that brands have, especially in this type of period, where take Unilever as an example, some of the brands that they have, some of the cleaning brands, etc., have the capacity to save people's lives. So melding sort of that brand sort of perception, putting a foot on the accelerator of innovation, and also molding that with the whole notion of purpose actually should be a very powerful catalytic force in a post-COVID environment.
Absolutely, and I think if you overlay that with the fact that now all things are digital, from everything that we do seems to now have some digital implication, from the way we shop, the way we educate our children, the way we buy, whatever. Every single thing in life seems to touch the digital world in some way. Clearly, the implications of that for a company like Unilever are tremendous, and so the whole commerce situation and how we get products into people's households and hands in new and different ways, other than through stores and stuff. I mean, there's lots of opportunity, I think, for development in this new world, and a lot of it, I think, is positive.
Now, before we leave that particular topic, because we've got to cover other things, I'd love to get your view and perspective of. And on this, I don't necessarily want you to give examples of confidential things with Unilever, of course. But in a purpose-led company, what manifestations do you see are there available of the day-to-day sort of interactions with the way in which decisions are made, the way in which things are looked at, that sort of differentiates a purpose-led company from a non-purpose-led company?
Mm. Um, I'm not sure I can give you a brilliant answer to that, but what I can give you is an answer which I suppose is my experience. I mean, my experience so far of working with Unilever is that, as I've said, communications for their brands, which is clearly what we focus our energies on, that simply extol the virtues of the benefits of that product are in and of themselves not enough. The product has to deliver more than that, and that more than piece is around the purpose. You know, what purpose does that product um, have in life? You know, for Dove, as you know, the Dove campaign was sort of pioneered the whole real beauty thing.
Yeah.
You know, some 10 or so years ago now. Many other brands have followed suit, but Dove was the first sort of major brand as I saw from an outsider, that really started to think about real people, not just stick thin supermodels in, you know, in sort of traditional advertisements, and started to position that brand and their products as fantastic products that meet the needs of real people. And so that's one example. But every single brand has has spent and does continue to spend huge amounts of time, and the people at Unilever are not just doing it because there's a box on the briefing chart that says you have to do it. They're doing it because they're passionate about it and they absolutely believe in it. Because if they didn't, they wouldn't work there. They'd be somewhere else, in my view. So there is definitely a difference to the way the culture of the company, and the culture of the company is very. They're still, you know, aggressively in search of growth and sales. They compete. They're a public company. They've got shareholders and all sorts of stakeholders. Obviously, they have to please.
Yeah.
But
So
but
it's not purpose instead of sales, is it?
it's not what. Sorry.
It's not purpose instead of sales, is it?
100% not. And I think some people make that mistake. It's absolutely not purpose instead of sales. I mean, Unilever are very much committed to both, and one doesn't exist without the other. But it's certainly not an either or.
Um, on a practical level, you, like many others, have spent the last X amount of years during the weeks and many weekends in the year in airport lounges and on aeroplanes. That's clearly come to a grinding halt. How are you managing to direct a massive piece of international business like Unilever, you know, from your living room?
Well, it's a very good question, David. And it's something that I've thought quite a lot about, and I don't have a sort of very sort of simple answer. I mean, on the one hand, do I miss, you know, going to Heathrow on a Sunday night and getting on a flight to wherever it might be?
Mhm.
Absolutely not. I mean, I haven't missed that aspect of travel at all. What I have missed, and I do miss, is I miss the human interaction, particularly with people that I don't know or don't know well. So I find that the Zoom life or the Microsoft Teams life that we all now seem to lead, I find that for the most part it works extremely well. Particularly when I'm talking to people like you, who I've known for many years, or colleagues or clients who I've known and know well. Where I find it much less helpful and much less efficient is if I'm talking to somebody who I've never met, or talking to somebody that I know hardly at all. It's there's no that's when it really feels to me like there's no substitute for being in a market, sitting down with them, having a coffee with them, having a glass of wine with them, or whatever it might be, and actually getting to know how that person ticks, how that business ticks. That's the bit that I find more difficult to do in this sort of remote world. So I see going forward, I see a world where I think we will definitely travel less. I have no, frankly, burning desire at all to get back on an aeroplane, particularly until there is a vaccine for this, you know, horrible disease. But I think when that happens, and hopefully it'll be soon, there are 3 or 4 places I really want to go to see the people and to understand more about the businesses and so forth. But I think it'll be different. You know, I think it'll be probably fewer trips, maybe for a longer period of time. I think it'll be more less time in the office, more time at home. I think the way we split our time will change. But I don't think travel will disappear. But I do think it'll diminish.
Do you think it's also put a lot of pressure on people in terms of the problems of the divide between sort of work and family life?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think. Do you mean the whole COVID thing?
Yes, I mean the whole COVID thing. Obviously, you know the pressures of uh, our children are older and you know don't need schooling, etc. But the whole notion of homeschooling, always on, Zoom live, work-life balance. It's everything has been thrown up in the air, and we're all trying to navigate our way through it to find that sort of balance. And some days, I've got to say, admit myself, I'm just finding that balance really, really difficult to be able to manage.
David, I am absolutely no doubt that when this is all over, there are going to be a great number of people, and some of them the least expected, actually, of people who are really have found it all very difficult. They are depressed. They are, it's really caused them a lot of mental anxiety. And I'm not just talking about young people living on their own in high-rise flats in blocks around the world or whatever, although those people are of particular concern. But I think that a lot of people are finding and will find this very, very challenging to recover from. And it's very hard to articulate exactly what it is they're finding challenging, because some of the people who I think will be finding this challenging are people who seem on the face of it to have life well set up and everything's fine and rosy and what have you. But I think I totally agree with you. I don't underestimate for one moment the difficulty this is going to have. I mean, people talk about comparing COVID to a war, don't they? Talk about the impact. I mean, I do think one of the parallels perhaps is, people come back from war and have suffered for decades with all sorts of
Sure.
horrible problems, and I think that could be different but the same.
We've all found new things about how we work, how we integrate with people in a sort of a virtual way. Both from a work perspective and from a family perspective. What have you found out about yourself over the last month or so that you didn't know beforehand?
Well, I've tried to. Well, I'll tell you. I would answer the question, but what I've tried to do. No, I've tried to be quite disciplined about my days. So I'm lucky enough to be in a house where I don't have to work in my bedroom or in my loft or whatever. So I have a routine. I get up, at the same time I would have got up if I had been in London going to work. I take some exercise, I take a walk, whatever. I come into my study where I'm sitting now, and I turn on my computer and I work. And I go and get a coffee at 10:30. Try not to drink coffee before 10:30. And then at lunchtime every day, I will close the computer and I will take a walk, or I'll go out, or I'll take a run, or I'll go to the gym or whatever. And then the afternoon I work, and when I've finished, I will leave this room. I'll shut the door. I'll go and have a shower and finish the day as if I'd got home. So I think that the day, it's important for me at least to have a beginning, a middle, and an end to the day, much as I would if I was in the office, so that I'm not, one day or one part of the day, it doesn't just sort of morph into the next, and Saturday's like Friday and Sunday's like Monday. I think it's important that the working, this at least it is for me, that the working week and the weekend are different from one another, and the working day and the evening when I'm with my wife and what have you, again, are different. So what have I learned about myself? I think one has to remain disciplined. Remain disciplined. I've had so much to do. I haven't had even a moment's when I've thought I've bored, or I'm looking now at my screen with the emails coming up in front of me and what have you. I mean, are ridiculous. So I've not certainly been bored, but I guess what I've learned, I've got to remain calm, remain disciplined. I've tried to remain in touch with all of my teams around the world, not just the senior people, but as many of the people as I can, particularly the people I know are on their own. Um, yeah, and I've tried to think a bit about some of the longer term issues, which is what I'm doing more and more now, which is one of the privileges, I think, of being at home. I'm trying to think about what I want to do differently when it's all over, and how I'd like to manage, the team differently, and where I think the opportunities will be.
Well, hopefully on another occasion we can come back and discuss that. I'll let you get back to your um, inbox in a minute, but before I let you go, I mean, this might be sort of naively idealistic, but do you think the world post-COVID, whenever that's going to be, and whatever post-COVID actually means, should be sort of a better place than it is today? I mean, it would seem a bit of a tragedy to me, at least, if everything snapped back, whatever time period we're talking about, to exactly how it was beforehand. Do you think that there's an opportunity to reset things that were the norm in the way in which the world sort of operates, so that we do come out in a better place. And if so, what might that be?
Hmm. Well, obviously, none of us know, but I hope very much, and I do believe that some of the things that we've all taken for granted for so long, we will not take for granted in quite the way that we have in the past. And I think we're coming into a horrific recession around the world, which is going to lead to enormous hardship and lots of trickiness and difficulty. And I hope that the world will be slightly more empathetic, and we'll all be slightly more tolerant of each other. Tolerance is a word that I like, because I think it's something that many of us could do better at. So I'm not naive enough to think that the world we're all going to become, all gooey and whatever. But I do think that this is having a huge impact on everybody, whatever their age, their background, their situation in life. This affects everybody, and so I do think it will change the way we all behave, and um, I very much hope that some aspects of that are for the better.
Well, likewise, Toby Hoare, the Global Client Director for Unilever at WPP. It's been a pleasure to chew the fat with you. I'll now let you get back to the rest of your emails before you try desperately hard to turn off for the rest of the day. But it's been an absolute pleasure. Thank you very much indeed.
Thank you very much, Dave. Thoroughly enjoyed seeing you. Okay. See you soon.